So deciding what price to offer on a home is really a function of two things. The first is the market value that we've come up with for the home, and the second are the current market conditions. Now, if anyone who's taken my home buyers bootcamp, I probably have about 20 plus videos on both figuring out what the market value is of a house or condo, including more complex and unique ones, and a bunch of videos on negotiating strategy. Now, I don't want to repeat those. This is going to effectively be an update that talks about some of the things that we need to think about when we're thinking about how to value a home and what to offer in a slowing market, because some of the approaches are completely different. So we're going to start off by looking at how do we determine the market value of a home when prices are falling rapidly. So coming up with the market value of a home during a declining market can sometimes be pretty tricky. Now, when deciding on the market value of a home really starts with finding usually 3 comparable homes that have sold in the area that are very similar to the home that you want to bid on, and we use those to really guide our valuation decisions about the home you're bidding on. And normally we can look at comparable sales from 3 or 4 months ago. Usually those are reasonable comparisons. Now the challenge in today's market, we're in the summer of 2022, is that we can't use comparables from 3 months ago because the market has changed significantly. So this chart shows the average home prices per week in the Toronto area for low-rise homes. And we can see that home prices peaked in February at just under 1.7 million and have now declined to around the mid $1.4 million price range. So that's a huge drop in prices. And yes, it's an average, but we actually are on the ground seeing prices have actually declined. Valuations have declined. Homes are selling for less today than they sold for 3 months ago. So how do you come up with a valuation when home prices are falling rapidly? Well, there are a couple of important things to consider. I mean, number one are the neighborhoods in the areas we're looking at. I mean, if we're looking at buying a home in downtown Toronto, this is a neighborhood where prices have not declined as much. We might be a little bit more comfortable using comparables from a month ago or 6 weeks ago. Whereas if we're looking at a house in the suburbs in a market where home prices have fallen rapidly, we need to use comparable sales over the past week, if not 2 weeks max, to guide our valuation decisions. And if there aren't enough comparables, we can go back 6 or 7 weeks, but we need to make an adjustment to take into account the fact that home prices have fallen. So for example, if I use a comparable sale from 6 weeks ago that sold for $1 million, but prices have fallen 5% since then, well, I need to adjust that price down by 5% before I even make any adjustments to take into account the differences in the home. So we need to sort of lower that valuation to today's standard before we kind of make any other adjustments. And this is sort of the way that we need to approach our valuations when we're looking at a market that's declining very slowly. We need the most recent sales, or we need to sort of take into account these price changes in our comparative market analysis. And that's the most important point, is kind of coming up with a rough idea of the market value in today's market, in today's kind of conditions. Now, the second important factor in thinking about what to offer in a home are the current market conditions. What area are we looking in? What are going on sort of in that neighborhood? So for example, if we're looking at a home in a market that is very slow, where the house has been on the market for 60 plus days, we might be a little bit more aggressive in our negotiating strategy. All the times we should be calling the seller's agent to understand the seller's motivations, because this is an important step I find a lot of agents don't do. They don't pick up the phone and call. I feel like they just don't think to. But it's actually a huge thing that you can do, because a lot of times the seller's agent will tell you how motivated the seller is. I mean, they shouldn't necessarily kind of reveal everything, but if the seller's bought a home and they need to sell and they're anxious, sometimes they'll give you all of that information. So why would you not want more information to guide your offer decision making? Now, when we're in a situation like that, where a home has been on the market for a long time and it's a market that's very slow, this might be a market where, we put in a lowball offer price, right? A lowball offer price is not just a price that is below the seller's asking price, it's a price that's actually below the market value of the home. So for example, if we're looking at a home that's listed for $1 million, but we think it's actually worth closer to $950 based on the comparable sales. Well, if we made our offer at $950, the seller may certainly perceive that's to be a lowball offer because it's below what they're asking, but their asking price is unrealistic. Their asking price may be based on comparables from 2.5 months ago, but prices have softened since then. So offer price of $950 in that situation is actually market value from our perspective, right? So if we wanted to make a lowball offer, that would be an offer closer to actually $900,000 if they're asking $1 million and we think the value is $950. And you do that in those markets because if the market's slow and you're not in a rush and you have all the time in the world and there are a lot of listings, why not try to get value? If we're in a slow market and for once in a decade the buyer has some negotiating leverage, why not try to take advantage of a slowing market? And what you're effectively doing is if you get that home for $9 or $920, you're actually getting it below market value based on today's conditions. And again, all of this depends on how motivated and willing the seller is to sell. We don't know if they're going to go for that lowball offer, but again, as a buyer, we certainly might want to try if we're working in a market that is relatively sluggish and a home's been on the market for a while. Now, not every offer in a slow market is going to be a lowball offer, right? And there are situations where we're not going to do that. And a couple of them, for example, some depend on the house and some depend on the neighborhood. If we're looking at a neighborhood, say in central Toronto, that is still relatively busy, and you could still, in a slowing market, have some areas that are busy, not 50 offers on homes or 20 offers, but 2 or 3 where it's still a bidding war. In those situations, you're probably going to have to offer market value to be competitive because there's something about that neighborhood. It's not as slow as some other ones, and it's still pretty competitive. So, you're not going to win a home if there's 2 or 3 bids by going with a lowball offer. You usually need to be at least market value. And bidding wars in slowing markets are not like bidding wars, when prices were exploding. Most of those offers usually tends to be reasonable within the value range. In slowing markets, even if there's 2 or 3 bids, people are not paying $100,000 more than a home's worth. That usually doesn't happen. Now, the other situation where we might not be kind of lowballing is if the home itself is relatively unique, right? So even in a slowing market, the nicest homes are going to get a lot of interest. That's just the way it works. If there's 100 homes on the market, the 5 nicest ones that are either have something unique about them, some kind of renovation or a unique lot and it's pie-shaped and it's the biggest lot in the neighborhood and it backs it onto a ravine, that home's going to sell relatively quickly. And you actually may even find yourself competing with other buyers in that home, even though the neighborhood itself is relatively slow and the market is relatively slow. So even for that type of property, you might end up offering close to market value. And again, it's not necessarily the worst thing because you're buying, you can't decide when the unique home comes on the market. And that's the thing when you're buying even in a slowing market. I made an offer on a home in 2017 when I knew the market was going to crash because a unique home had come up in my neighborhood, and they don't come up very often. It was a wide lot, it was detached. I didn't get it. I was the second highest bidder. But I couldn't time when those homes come on the market. And that's the same thing in this case. You can't time when the unique home comes on the market. And if you can get it for a decent price, market value at that time, you're not going to lowball those homes. So I hope those kind of, that kind of guides a little bit of your understanding about some of the ways we try to value homes in a slowing market and some of the things we want to think about and consider when we're bidding. And especially, I'm going to go back to kind of thinking about sort of this idea of making lower offers or lowball offers in slower markets. The one thing I want to leave all buyers keeping in mind is that most agents today don't understand what it's like to work in a slowing market. They've only worked in a market where you pay more than the asking price, not below the asking price. So, there are a lot of agents out there who are nervous or anxious or uncertain about going below asking, like of going below market value, about upsetting the seller or upsetting the seller's agent. And this is where, if you have an agent that you're working with that's like that, a lot of times the buyer needs to drive the negotiations, unfortunately. If you have an agent who's very anxious and nervous, you needs to take, the leadership and kind of push the agent there, because some agents are just very anxious. So I hope this all kind of gives you a little bit of background, some guidance, and to think about how to navigate a slowing market depending on the type of home and the neighborhood that you're considering buying in. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you're looking for advice and guidance to navigate this volatile and challenging real estate market, you can click the link below to set up an appointment with me personally. For home buyers, I'm offering for a limited time a 50% off discount code for my home buyers bootcamp. The code's 50 off. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me at askjohn@movesmartly.com.